Hello and welcome. We have a very, very important show tonight. We're going to be talking about physical discipline, about the continuum between physical discipline and abuse. We're going to be talking some about the Adrian Peterson case. This show is being taped on September 22nd, 2014. And so many things may have happened since we tape, but I think what we're going to talk about is going to be timely for a long, long, long time and needs more attention. My guest is Libby Bergman. Libby is the executive director of the Family Enhancement Center in South Minneapolis, 48th in Chicago. You've been the director since 2000, and you're one of the co-founders, I read.
I am, yes. I'm one of 3 co-founders.
Back in 93?
93, yes, yeah.
So it's been around a long, long time.
Yeah.
Let me just tell you a little bit more about Libby, and then we'll have her tell you more about the center. She's a LICSW. Those of you who are not social workers, that stands for Licensed Independent Clinical Social Worker. She has worked in the field of child protection and is considered an abuse specialist, really. She worked with face-to-face health and counseling services in St. Paul. She's worked for the Minneapolis Children's Medical Center, where I also have worked. She's worked at the Family Life Mental Health Center in Anoka, and she's done all kinds of speaking around the country. She's authored several publications. She had a wonderful award, congratulations, back in 2011, and the award was called the Heroes for Children Award, and it was from the Children's Law Center of Minnesota. That must have meant a lot.
It did, actually. I sometimes struggle with accepting those kind of awards, but it really felt good, and it was the result of a lot of work, especially the work of the center, the Family Enhancement Center.
Yeah, really validating, and I bet a shot in the arm.
Yes,
for the next 20 years.
Right, yeah.
The Family Enhancement Center, if you would just be sitting on a plane and describing to your seat, person seated next to you on the plane, what you do, how would you, just in a brief explanation, define the mission of the center?
Well, the mission is child abuse prevention and treatment, and we look at it really on a continuum of services. So we do education for parents and professionals around child abuse prevention, and we do the next kind of level up is parent education in their homes. So families who are struggling with risk for child abuse, we will go to their home and help coach, model, teach parenting skills. And then kind of the next level up would be the therapeutic services. And we have some really unique therapeutic services for children who've experienced trauma.
And how big is your staff?
Well, we have 21 staff members. So
it's quite large for a nonprofit with this focus, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you go into homes and work with families as a coach, or your staff do, are those people that are referring themselves, saying we need help, or are they people who are identified by other professionals, or some of each?
Sadly, right now, we are serving only those who are referred to us for help, and that's a kind of a funding issue. We used to get referrals for families who were asking for help, but the funding has changed such that right now they're really being asked to get services in their homes. So.
And that referral would come from the county, usually?
Yeah, yeah, from Child Protection.
And how are you funded?
Well, that's a contract with the Hennepin County. So the in-home parenting services are a contract service for the county. And then we do, as I said, see families and children for therapy. And those services are usually billed through their medical insurance. And if they don't have medical insurance, we would have them go on a sliding fee scale. So we don't turn anyone away.
Okay, that's good to know. We will put their website and a phone number up at the end of the hour or half hour here, along with the Greater Minneapolis Child Crisis Center, the nursery. So that's for people who need help right away. Well, abuse is such a big word. It's being talked about right now by people. Wherever I go, I hear people talking about the Adrian Peterson case.
Yeah.
How do you define abuse?
Well, you know, I think that's a hard question. I can tell you the definition in Minnesota is if you injure a child through your punishment of them, that is abuse. So that's kind of the legal definition.
And that is physical injury?
It's a physical injury of some sort. So, you know, a slap that leaves a red mark but goes away in an hour or two is not abuse, legally. But, you know, if you strike a child and there's a bruise or swelling that lasts, or, you know, a cut or a broken bone, obviously that. So that's the injury abuse.
So what about emotional abuse, sexual abuse?
Yeah.
May not leave,
yes,
you know,
and those
physical marks.
Yes, and sexual abuse is certainly also legally defined in specific ways having to do with where children are touched and who's touching them and what their age are. It's a pretty complicated definition, but certainly sexual abuse is defined specifically under the law in Minnesota. And emotional abuse is too. However, emotional abuse is very hard to determine because you have to prove that psychological harm is occurring. And so where you might see a parent say something very cruel to a child, that's not enough for someone to intervene. There actually has to be someone who can kind of draw a straight line from, you know, those hurtful words to an emotional disorder or condition that's a result of the emotional abuse.
That could be very
It's very
tricky,
hard,
couldn't
yeah.
it, to
And it
prove?
almost never happens. Yeah.
Because of all the variables, because,
Sure.
you know, who's to say exactly what causes what?
Exactly, yeah.
But it's still a big deal, isn't it? I
Oh,
mean,
it is.
I've witnessed as a social worker situations where I've thought a person's spirit has just been beaten down over, you know, time with harsh parenting.
Sure.
And
Sure, yeah.
it's very, very hurtful and painful to see.
And they often go together, the emotional abuse and the physical abuse, so.
Yes, I bet so.
Yeah.
Would you say they almost always do?
I think they almost always do.
That's
Yeah,
interesting,
yeah.
Libby.
Yeah, I just read an article recently about a researcher who measured an audio recording of parents with their children. And that was one of the things he noted, was because he could hear, obviously, the words, but then he could also hear the sounds of hitting and slapping and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Interesting. Would you like to comment specifically on the little boy, 4-year-old Adrian Peterson's son, in terms of your thoughts on how this has evolved in our consciousness in terms of the public awareness of the topic, and, you know, kind of where are you at thinking about this today, September 22nd?
You know, I'm very glad that we're talking. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing that has come out of this. I think it can really, in some ways, be seen as a very positive action that's occurring because of the Adrian Peterson case. I don't think I've ever heard as much conversation about whether we should use physical discipline, what is abuse, what is not abuse. You know, why do people abuse? You know, in the grocery store, I've chatted with people. My clients have brought it up at the center. Our staff is talking about it just pretty much nonstop, and with lots of different viewpoints. So I think it's really positive that we're having the conversation, and I think it's a jumping off point for us as a state, to maybe make some changes in how we want to raise our children.
And as a country, don't you think?
And as a country, yeah.
I
it
mean,
really
it's
is nationwide, isn't it? Yeah.
Being talked about on a lot of the national shows.
Yeah.
A lot right now. When you think about physical punishment, I know you said to me that you have really strong feelings about the negatives involved with it. Tell us some of the things that you worry about as a social worker when you hear about physical punishment.
Well, I think many people aren't aware of the effects of physical punishment on children. And there's so many studies that have examined people who have experienced physical punishment, whether it's abuse or just even spanking, which 60% of parents say they do. There's probably more than 60% actually do. But just physical punishment alone is associated with depression in adulthood. It's associated with chemical health problems. It's associated with marrying a partner who is physically abusive to you. And interestingly, it's also associated with cognitive development, which I think many people aren't aware of.
And how do you track that? That's a big statement.
It is. And there's been quite a bit of research on looking at the use of spanking, and especially in younger children. There's one study that looked at 800 children between the ages of 2 and 9, and what they did was they tracked how many times parents said that they spanked, and then they looked at cognitive development, and the more a child was spanked, the slower their cognitive development was. So it's pretty striking, and a large sample of 800 children, so that they followed obviously for many years.
That is very, very interesting. And you said the ACT scores, you were mentioning that a few minutes ago. Tell us some of the studies that looked at those.
Yeah, many people are not aware, but corporal punishment is allowed in many schools in the United States. It's kind of a state-by-state decision, I think, for the most part. So some states allow physical punishment within the school system and others don't. And when you look at the ACT scores, the states that use physical punishment, those ACT scores are significantly lower than students who attend schools that don't allow any physical punishment. So that, I think, is striking in and of itself. And even when you look at the change over the years, when there's been a lot of efforts to raise the ACT scores in the United States, and over that time period, the spanking states or the corporal punishment states, they improve less slowly, or they improve more slowly than the states that are not using corporal punishment in the schools.
What do you think sort of then is happening between the physical punishment at home and or at school, home and school, and then a child's ability to study and learn?
Yeah. Well, and I think
kind of is that middle.
And I don't know if we really know the answer to that question, but a lot of people have theories, and some of the theories are that children who are experiencing a lot of punishment, physical punishment, they have fear of exploration, and it's curiosity that fires learning for many children. And so if they're kind of tapped down in many ways because of the physical discipline, their curiosity is stunted in some ways. And if it's punishment that's causing fear, fear and learning don't mix very well. Now, a child who's preoccupied, is worried about getting a punishment, can't focus on their schoolwork. They're off somewhere else in their fear.
I saw a quote, not sure who it was now, I think it may have been Chris Carter, the former Viking, but a quote about respecting a parent because of fear versus respecting a parent because of love.
Yeah.
And that was a very interesting, made me stop and think. I was spanked as a child with a belt, and I wasn't a very naughty child, but I think I was the first child, and my parents thought we've got to train her up to be obedient and you know, good girl. And so I feel I grew up just fine, but times have changed a lot, haven't they?
They certainly have.
And people that are those still using physical punishment often say, well, I was punished as a child physically and it didn't hurt me, and
Right.
And use it's our tradition, it's our
Right.
our family style, it's our cultural style.
Yeah.
That's kind of hard, I would think, as a professional to argue against.
It is. It is very hard to argue against. And at the Family Enhancement Center, honestly, we try to not tell people you're doing it wrong or, you know, this is the right way, because every parent is going to make their own choice. Obviously, if they're breaking the law, we're mandated reporters. But other than that, we really, you know, try to just point a different direction, and there are alternatives. There's different ways of doing it. This is the advantage of doing it differently. But you're right, a lot of people were raised with it, and frankly, under stress, are tempted to go back to it, and many do. Even if they say, I will never spank my child, you know, given the right set of circumstances, their stress level goes high enough, they will do it. So it is very hard, and it takes a lot of courage and determination to stop it, honestly.
How do you help people stop it?
Well, we give them tools. That's number one. So
Tools such as?
just alternative ways. So and we try to put it in the broader context of, you know, discipline. It means to teach. So what are you trying to communicate to your child?
What's your goal?
What's your goal? You know, are you trying to teach good manners at the dinner table? Are you trying to teach, you know, non-aggressive behavior with peers? Whatever it is, so how are you teaching that? And is hitting consistent with that goal of teaching? Most of the time, frankly, it's not. And so when they can kind of look at that, you know, they'll often come over and decide to make some changes.
I think if a person is cool, calm, and collected and thinks about it, one would probably say, if I'm wanting my child to quit hitting the neighbor boy
Right.
by my spanking him, what am I modeling?
Right.
You know, that's fairly logical.
Yeah.
And yet I think parents are human and they reach sometimes that boiling point and don't know what else to do, or just react immediately.
Yeah.
So I think we can all understand why
How-
parents do spank.
Yeah.
With a child who's been spanked a lot versus a child who's spanked just rarely, are there any studies about how they do?
You know, I really think it's honestly child by child. So you know, certainly less spanking is better in the long run. And I think there are studies that look at how many times you're spanking or the severity of the spanking. But each child is kind of born with their own temperament and their own personality, and some children can tolerate traumatic experiences and come out pretty fine. And other children who are maybe a little more sensitive emotionally, they, you know, it doesn't take a lot to get them off course or, you know, move them towards maybe, you know, depression or low self-esteem.
That's,
You know, yeah, so-
you made a comment to me on the phone that was scary, kind of. You said lots of parents who were whipped turned out just fine, but a lot didn't.
Yeah.
Or a lot of children who were whipped. And you said one can't know often until it's too late
Yeah.
whether physical punishment is damaging or not.
Right, right.
Say a little bit more about that.
Well, I just don't, you don't really know when you start out on this path of parenting. As you said with your parents, you know, they had good intentions. I think most parents have really good intentions. They want to do right by their children. And so they may start out on a path. And sometimes physical discipline, as I said, you know, if you have a child who has a, you know, kind of an easygoing temperament, you might spank them once and they may never do anything wrong again. But that child who maybe is more challenging, has a more challenging temperament, then the spanking can just create more anger, resentment. Their behavior often ramps up in response, and then you have to, you know, the discipline has to get more severe. And I think those are the cases, sadly, where we end up, you know, with a child protection case, an injured child, that kind of thing.
So it's kind of a vicious circle. If you've got a child who is
aggressive,
challenging.
Yeah.
That's interesting. A lot of times I think parents come from different backgrounds, and it makes it extra tricky in terms of I grew up in a family where I wasn't spanked versus I grew up in a family in which physical punishment was the norm.
Yeah.
And parents then get into tension, which adds another layer of stress to the whole family.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for parents who may be watching and saying, well, I agree with Libby Bergman. I think like she does, but her husband or the wife may say, I don't. I mean, how do you negotiate that?
Yeah. Well, I think you can certainly give them the information and let them draw some conclusions on their own. And I think just that whole concept of looking at parenting as a relationship. What kind of relationship do you want to have with your child? And do you want that child to, as they're growing, be able to come to you when they're struggling, when they're upset, you know, especially as they mature, when they get into those teen years? If you've been using a lot of physical discipline, sometimes that relationship isn't so good. Oftentimes children at adolescence then will just leave the home or don't see their parents as a resource to go to if they're in trouble. So that's another way to kind of look at what relationship are you building with your child through the use of physical punishment.
It's a big question, isn't it? Very big question. When you think about alternatives, I'm sure there are parents out there who say, as they listen, well, she doesn't know my Johnny. You know, what do you think about timeouts? What do you think about taking away privileges? What are some of your tried and true ideas in lieu of physical punishment?
Yeah. Well, I certainly taking things away and timeout is very, they're both very viable. But the reality is there are going to be children who do not respond well. And a lot of the families that we work with at the Family Enhancement Center have children that have mental health issues themselves and may not respond to the timeout or the taking privileges away. And so at that point, you really need to kind of rally around that parent. And that's where I think we fall short as a society, is we don't have a lot of ways to support those parents. If you're struggling with your 4-year-old, it's pretty easy to, you know, if you need to get that 4-year-old to move, you know, you can, without physical punishment, you can get them to cooperate with you.
You're bigger.
You're bigger, you're stronger, that's right.
Right.
But when they're 10, 11 and having a huge tantrum, then what do you do?
Right.
And parents need backup. I mean, honestly, that's a big piece that's missing for many parents. And there aren't that many resources for them to call in that moment when they're struggling with their 10-year-old who's throwing something or maybe, you know, getting threatening. And those are the kinds of solutions I think we need to start working on. We need to create some networks and also just give parents permission. It's okay to ask for help. You don't have to know all the answers, you know.
And to maybe do some planning when you are calm and cool and can strategize or come see a social worker or a psychologist or talk to your family doctor.
Right.
We're going to put on the screen now the website for the Family Enhancement Center. So if you want to do more thinking, more reading, you can go to that center, learn more about what the wonderful organization is all about. So it's www.familyenhancementcenter.org. And would you read your phone number?
It's 612-827-3028.
And then we're also going to put up on the screen a phone number for the Greater Minneapolis Crisis Nursery, and they take calls at all hours. So look for that number on the screen as well as their website. Well, we just have a couple minutes left. Do you have some thoughts for us in terms of if you are a neighbor or a grandmother, you suspect that things are not going well in terms of possible abuse or too much physical punishment? What should a person do, Libby?
I'm so glad you asked that. You know, I think start with the family if you can, and just if you could reach out to them and say, you know, it's kind of seems like it's sort of hard right now, or I can see you're struggling a little bit. I know you're doing a good job. You never want a parent to feel like they're a failure. I mean, that is the worst thing, because a child will feel that later. So you want to make that parent feel like they're doing a great job, you can see they're trying, but you know they need help. And so is there any way I can help you? Do you need a break? Is there, you know, something I can do to help you out so that the stress goes down a little bit? That's certainly one option. And if that doesn't work, I really encourage people to, make a call to someone, maybe in their community that might be able to reach out to that parent. If it's a school official, if they go to the same church community.
And they can also call anonymously the county, can't they?
They certainly can, yeah.
With no danger that they will be outed, so to speak.
Yes,
right?
You can make an anonymous report, and that can be life-saving to children.
Right, that's important. Well, thank you so much for coming down. I know you're very busy right now taking all kinds of media calls, and you're reaching out to the Vikings, which sounded great. So thank you for coming down and sharing with us some of your wisdom and good ideas, Libby.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Mary.
You're welcome. Been talking with Libby Bergman, the Executive Director of the Family Enhancement Center here in South Minneapolis. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Until then, have a good week.